Yeah, this way, yeah. And if you ever see the stream not glowing,
But yeah, if I don't see it on, I
Yeah.
usually start it too.
yeah.
There's Florence's.
Hi, Karen.
Well, hello.
I've been here a while. I just been flitting around.
Oh, yes. Well, I think everybody's flittering around.
I had to warn Judy Cross, and she hadn't seen that new Kong movie yet. And she does. I warned her because there's a giant SPIDER. Oh, I have to spell it with you. A giant spider. It's huge.
Oh, what's the movie called?
And that Kong, Skull Island.
Oh, Kong.
It's pretty good, and
Oh.
it's pretty good. There's only a few bad words. Like some PG-13, you know. You can't get
Yeah.
away. They had to put some little word in there, just whatever.
I know what
But,
you mean.
but,
Yeah.
it was,
PG-13 usually have a few, yeah.
but that's it. And of course, about
Uh-huh.
people getting killed, you know.
There's Mr.
Hello, Karen.
Teen. Yes, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing just fine.
Outstanding. You passed me, I didn't pass you, I didn't even shake your hand, darling.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you so much.
Okay, good.
Gotta keep on moving.
Yes, you do that, for sure.
Keep on moving.
Always good to hear that you're doing very well.
Oh ho, 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 ho.
So you know, Judy Cross does not like spiders. Now, have you heard? She's just
Oh.
terrified. I mean, she'll be reading the book, and she'll throw the book. I've been told that. And so I had to warn her about the spiders.
Oh, yeah, because
So thank you for the warning. Because that one Harry Potter movie they didn't warn her about is spiders all over the place. And one of them, I don't remember which one. You need to warn her. We went to the zoo the other once, and she just saw the word tarantula. I acted like I didn't know her.
did she, is that right?
I mean,
Well,
she's.
oh, well, they are, I mean, I sure don't, you know.
I mean, I'm not terrified of them, but I mean, you know, the thing is, her and her sister went to go see the movie Arachnophobia. I go, why? Why? The whole time she's going like this the whole time, and she's scared of her because her head looks.
Oh my, she shouldn't have gone to that
I
movie.
don't know why.
I don't know.
Why? Maybe she's trying to desensitize herself, maybe.
I'm not sure it's possible.
See, that I would never go see Moby Dick again because I don't like wiggles.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, that's a crazy, but I haven't figured out why though. That one movie, Castaway, she's surprised I didn't go running out of the theater.
Hello, howdy,
One big
brother.
whale up.
Castaway, I saw that.
But we just recently bought it and watched it again.
Oh,
Kathy,
yeah.
You're like a stranger around
Cheap
here.
place.
I'm in and out.
Good,
In and out.
pretty good.
Pop in, pop out. That's what I do.
Move on down,
Up
Peggy,
and down.
and sit here if you like. I'll just put my purse over here. Yeah. You almost need an extra seat for that book and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
I wish,
I'll move my
I wish
house
we
and
had
I'm gonna
those
sit
little
right
half
here.
desktop things.
Yeah, you've got a way to prop
we
up
don't have
to.
where to put our
The meeting gets
I
it wrong.
know.
Yeah, I deserve to be the front thing anyway, so.
Hello, Steve.
Oh.
How you doing, Johnny? Hello, Isaac.
No, we're not gonna repeat it unless.
I'm probably going to. I'm fine when I'm outside. It's just when I come
You're all
here.
by yourself?
Yeah, and Donna was pretty quick coming. She said she didn't have wildest.
He doesn't really cough a lot, but he just can't breathe.
So you last week on Sunday, because it was.
That's really
Yeah.
No, Bud was watching it. I think there was like 35. Johnny was listening to it on the way here.
Okay.
It was 35, 36. We were behind at one.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
So you're leaving Sunday?
Tomorrow.
Oh.
We'll be gone Sunday, but we're leaving tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So have you've been gone, haven't you, Karen?
I did, I went to Houston.
Okay. I think
get a lot
that's
of
probably
sympathy
when
'cause
you
you
weren't
sound-
here last
Do
week.
I feel so bad? I feel fine. I just can't stop it.
Yes, yes, March is my month, I always know.
I know how
Good.
loving we are in
Visit, I
allergies
guess?
bad.
Yes, so.
I think
I
my
just
mom had the same problem.
1 o'clock.
I think my mother has the same thing. She had it,
Houston is your
She
sister.
can't stop coughing either.
Northwest.
No.
Okay.
The wind blows, there's something that he's
My
allergic
brother he has lived in the Houston area, and he just moved back down there. Well, he just got there this past weekend.
Oh, is that?
He's back in the area again. As he said, he's home again.
Oh, okay, yeah, back to Texas, where was he before?
He started out in Houston, then he went to San
On a
Antonio,
special diet, so I'm
then
having
to
a lot more
Atlanta,
hot flashes.
and then back to Houston. And
Debbie.
then he's been in Tulsa for the last year, and he did not like Tulsa at all.
Howdy, Mary, how are you?
Staying hydrated, I hope.
Yeah,
Which he likes much better.
Oh, good deal.
Okay, well,
flashes are not fun.
You can't have any
Yes.
caffeine, you have to have water.
Well, that's good for you. Although the caffeine, boy, I sure miss that in
I
the
started
morning.
on it Saturday and I've lost 6 pounds so far.
no,
What's
should
the
we have a
occasion?
copy
What are you
of
doing?
that?
Just you want
All I heard
to
was
fit
no
and trim?
caffeine.
Yeah,
It's causing
what?
her hot.
What's the reason? Just get healthy?
I heard that too.
Well, I put on 20 pounds, put 20 pounds back on since I lost all that weight.
Right.
And it's a choice of either getting rid of some of this weight or buying new clothes. And I'm not gonna buy new clothes. I've spent
you're
enough
fat.
money this year.
Well, usually I'm over there, but, you're fine. You just
I can understand.
That's a charity.
my gray hair, right?
Is it covering your? It looks good. It looks good.
Yeah, don't know.
I'm not there. Well, there's some there, but, as of next Wednesday, they'll be gone.
Did you make it?
Yeah, all I have to do is just bend my knees, I'll fall into the chair. Getting up's the hard part, getting down's easy.
You're recording and streaming now.
You know what?
You're recording and streaming. You're on the air.
I'm wondering if we,
Well, but I think we're kind of right in the middle of it.
which one are we gonna go up? Both of them at the same time?
That's what did it.
Are you gonna come back and do that again? Why don't you put your head over your mouth?
That's what I tell her. Cover that mouth when you're outside.
Oh, the visual.
I'm gonna take my default seat,
We got a new book.
my original seat.
Oh,
No, these are all the pictures he left out of the book.
That's the pictures he didn't put in.
Yeah.
I might kick you in the.
I see where it's at now.
I thought maybe he was gonna be picky who he handed them to.
Yeah.
Oh, it's mainly.
Apparently he left them out, and these are just,
oh, I didn't.
because I'm recognizing some of them.
About the time we're halfway through the book, then you get a
Patty's
picture.
one, she gave it to me. Hers.
Right.
You made a lot of these.
Yeah, well, I made them big enough where you could read them, and there's a couple of them where the printing on them is a lighter color, and so I made it big where you could see them.
Oh, those maps are big, they are
What
nice.
work you've done.
Well, I already had the slides, in all fairness, so it's just a matter of,
Put the book, okay.
yeah, picking out the ones I wanted to print.
Okay.
All right, we are in the 12th chapter. Dad, I know you called this morning, I said I thought 13th was 12th chapter.
I couldn't get it all read anyway, my eyes won't let me. So, I tried.
Anyway, we took a little bit of time last week because I really want you to appreciate why God told Abram to get out of the country. And if you remember, I showed these slides. We'll go back and point out the fact that, of course, there's and I have a question mark there on the Garden of Eden, but Haran. And you remember I told you that his father, who was his father?
Whose father?
Abram. Who was Abram's father?
Terah.
Terah, right. And I told you, and I showed you the scripture where Terah was an idolater. Worshiped idols. I showed you scriptures where, lost my track here, my thought. I'll get it here in a minute. There was Lot. In 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 8, I showed you where Lot was a faithful man, and Lot was related to Abram, and the two of them were told to get out of, or Abram was told to get out of the country. God wanted to make sure, and this was God's plan all along, was to spare and the Messianic line. And so it had to come this way. He wanted to get his faithful out away from idolatry worship. And to an extent, that's a good lesson for us today, because God doesn't want Christians to get ourselves involved in the cares of the world. And He wants us to stay faithful, to be the kind of Christians, the kind of children that would exemplify Him. And so, just as He had Abram and Lot get out of that country, He's done the same thing with us today. So there's the lesson, if you will. So what we're going to begin with this evening is verse 6 of chapter 12. But before we do, let me mention that Maxine Life is now home. The doctor took her off all the medications that the other doctor had put her on, and put her on new medications. And she's very nauseated. She's having a hard time staying awake. She doesn't want any meals right now. So do keep her in your prayers. I talked to Fanny today. Fanny's doing well. She did hit her head when she fell and cut it, but didn't have to have stitches. So remember her. And of course, Tila's not feeling well tonight. Danny Cross is not feeling well tonight. There's another sister, Sue, which all of you have met. She's been here a couple of times. She's now been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Fortunately, though, on the news tonight, there was a new drug approved for that actually stops the progression of the disease.
Cool.
Won't cure it, because there is no cure for an autoimmune disease like that that affects the central nervous system. But if you can stop it, that certainly would help. And Stephanie, she's going to have outpatient surgery Monday, Sharon Nip is very sick today, had a very rough day, so we want to keep her in our prayers as well. So, with all that said, I might mention Alina Kemp had pink eye. So, with all that said, though, Jensen, would you like to lead us in prayer?
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all your many wonderful blessings. We thank you for this day that you allowed us the opportunity to be able to gather here this evening to study another portion of your word. Please be with us as we go through this study, to have us have open minds and open hearts, to learn about your will and to become better servants of you. Please be with those who are mentioned this evening, that you comfort them and have them get through their trials and in this point in their lives, and to make it simpler on them, and help us do what we can to assist them in any way that we can, so that they can recover and again rejoin us and worship you with you, and worshiping you. Please forgive us our sins and repent of them. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Okay, amen. If you look at your handout on page 30, capital letter E is where we'll begin tonight. But I'm going to begin reading from the very beginning of chapter 12, and we'll stop at verse 6 and talk about it a little bit. It says, "Now the Lord had said to Abram, Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Verse 4, Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go into the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Morah, and the Canaanites were then in the land. Now we'll stop right there. I need to turn this mic on. I have some folks at home. So, what we see here, Abram passed through the land. In other words, he did not travel looking for the place to stop, but was waiting for direction from God. Which is pretty significant when you think about the fact that God told him to leave everything he had back here, and all of his friends, his relatives and everything, and go to a land that I will show you. And so that's what Abram is doing. That shows his faith, is that he was waiting for direction from God. God had told him to go to a place that he would show him, and Abram traveled on until he heard the word. And so you see, and the Canaanites were then in the land. In the latter part of verse 6 there, the last sentence there, and the Canaanites were then in the land, is the New King James Version. So Abram's promised land then was already inhabited. During the first 10 years in his new land, Abram wandered about, living in a tent as an alien and stranger, while confronted with hostile inhabitants, famine, family division, and war. Abram's faith is characterized, though, by obedience. Even when it flew in the face of common sense, leaving home to travel to an unknown land, and natural love sacrificing his son, we see the faith in Abram, and we'll see that sacrificing his son a little bit later. But Abram's faith is also impressive because of its endurance. Now think about that for a minute. This is one thing to begin an adventure with all the initial exhilaration and expectations at the age of 75. Remember, that's what he said in verse 4 there, that he was 75 years old when he departed. But it's quite another to continue that commitment after the honeymoon is over, so to speak, and the realities of the struggle start to settle in. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm 70 years old, turned 70 this year. And I think everything started falling apart when I turned 70. And I can only imagine, of course, people lived longer back then, but to be told at 75 years of age to make this journey of where he didn't know where he was going, except that God told him he would tell him eventually, had to be a significant sign of faith on Abram's part. So we look at verse 7, and in verse 7 it says, "Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, To your descendants I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him." Now this is in your capital letter F on page 30 of your handout. Genesis 7 and 8 is what he lists. Men of God have always been men of worship. Twice we are told that Abram built an altar to the Lord. And in John 4:23 and 24, he mentions here the Father still seeks true worshipers. In fact, if you go back to the original Hebrew word, and I think I'm correct on this if I remember my studies and everything, the original Hebrew word for man is upward looking. The idea is that mankind from the day we were created has always been looking up to some superior being. Oftentimes it's wrong, but those who are faithful, like Abram, is looking up to the right Creator and shows their faith towards that Creator. So the Lord appeared to Abram then, and this is the first recorded appearance of the Lord to a patriarch. The shift from speaking to appearing is not incidental. This is a way of augmenting an audition to heighten its dramatic force and reinforce the claim that a divine intervention has occurred. Abram has been chosen by God to make this journey. And so God goes on to tell Abram then, to your descendants I will give this land. This may also have come to as quite a shock to Abram. And I say may because the scriptures don't tell us that. We're supposing here. Although God never specifically promised the land to Abram himself, even though he told Abram to get thee out of his current land and I'll show you the land, it could be argued that it was implied in God's original command. Okay, but the scriptures are silent in that respect. So we see in verse 8 then, in verse 8 it says, "And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west, and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord." All right, so there is a force in the contrast between pitched and built in this verse. Okay, the one for himself, the other for God. He pitched his tent, but he built an altar. The only structure Abram ever left behind him were altars. No relics of his own wealth that we know of was left behind. Alright? And we go on, we look at verse 9 then. He says, "So Abram journeyed going on still toward the south." Let me put that up here. And okay. Even though Shechem marked his stopping point, it is clear to Abram that his journey is not over. This land was to be given to his offspring. He would continue to dwell in it, but his life would be that of a nomad. The word for journeyed derives from a term for the pulling up of tent stakes. The progressive form in which it is cast is a precise indication of movement through successive encampments. Negeb is the Hebrew word for south. the southern regions of the land had gained their own identity, similar to how the South has become a proper noun in our culture. The brief itinerary of Abram in verses 5 through 9 take him from the northern to the southern borders of the land. And he not only sees what has been promised to him, but he walks through it. And he lives. And he worships in it. Symbolically then, Abram has taken possession of the land, even though he is nomadic in this land at this time. Any comments or questions through verse 9? Yes, John.
Did Eskew have any comments about how the Lord appeared to Abram?
I do not. The scriptures doesn't say exactly how he appeared. We just know that he appeared for the first time to a patriarch. And if I was guessing, it would be in a spiritual form, not in the form of a man. But I don't know. Ron, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't recall a place where there's indication that the Lord appeared to him. He talked to him.
Right.
Said what he wanted to say to him. Times past, God spoke to the fathers through, spoke directly to the heads of the households.
It depends on which version you're using. There are a couple of versions that say appear.
King James says appear in Numbers.
King James does say appear.
Appear and talk.
New King James does too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know exactly how he appeared.
It does say in verse 7, the Lord appeared to Abram and said,
Yeah.
I give you this land.
I mean, whether he just talked to him or whether he appeared, the point is, I think, and your question's a good question, John, but I think this is an opportunity to really show the emphasis that God is placing on Abram's faith. And we're going to see a lot more of this as we go on in the life of Abram. Gene?
It's also a message of however the message came, it was to be understood and followed, and Abraham understood it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it certainly didn't come in a dream and everything. It was done in such a way that Abram fully understood what he was to do, and Abram did it without questioning. So, but I don't know. I'll look at that a little bit more, John. I don't know that I'll find anything different, but that's a good question. Any other questions or comments through verse 9? All right, look at verse 10 then. And verse 10 is in your handout on page 30. Capital letter G says, for some reason Abram seems to have left God out of his plans when he went down to Egypt. Two missteps. First, Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there in Genesis 12:10. And then, secondly, Abram developed a plan of deceit to save his life from the Egyptians in verses 11 through 13. And we'll look at that here in just a moment. And you can see if you agree with what he said or if you have another thought. But in verse 10 it says, now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. Let me put that up there. There we go. All right. The fluctuating rainfall made the land susceptible to food shortages until the advent of modern methods of irrigation. And Egypt was the standard refuge in this situation, as the Nile provided a much more certain food supply. And let me show you a map here. He goes down to Egypt here. But what do you see right here?
The Nile.
The Nile River. The Nile River, even today, for Egypt, is a very important river because that river provides a lot of fertile land and it provides a lot of opportunity for farmland. So they were not lacking in Egypt. In fact, as we get a little bit further in Genesis, you'll find other situations where Jacob, or Israel's sons, and Jacob all went down to Egypt for food because there was a great drought. And so Egypt was always fertile. And in fact, you remember Joseph, when he convinced Pharaoh to allow Jacob and his sons to stay down there, where did he put them? In the land of Goshen, the most fertile area down there. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to it, because there was a reason why he did that. But so we had that praise, and Abram went down to Egypt then to dwell there. Well, it is striking that Abram is said to have gone to settle in Egypt, to be an immigrant there. To live as an immigrant suggests the intention of long-term settlement, which is somewhat alien to Abram's wandering lifestyle. It also comes as quite a surprise to hear that Abram is ready to settle in Egypt so soon after he has been promised this land. This proved to be a mistake, which God specifically forbids Isaac from following. Go to Genesis, the 26th chapter, and look at verses 1 and 2. And Karen, if we could begin with you tonight, when you get over there, if you'd read that for me.
Okay.
Genesis 26, verses 1 and 2.
And there was a famine in the land, beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of.
Okay. So, we see then that this decision that Abram made might have been a mistake here. When we consider what Genesis 26 verses 1 and 2 says. Jacob, having learned this lesson, will need divine reassurance before traveling to Egypt. Go and look at Genesis 46 chapter and verses 1 through 4. Pat, your eyes let you see well enough to read that?
It'd be best if I don't.
Okay. Donna? Genesis 46 verses 1 through 4.
Got it. So Israel set out with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob, and he said, Here I am. He said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will be also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will close your eyes.
Okay. Depending on which version you look at, some people would say that Joseph put his hand on your eyes, or will put his hands on your eyes. The idea is that Jacob, having learned this lesson that we see here in Genesis 26, 1 and 2, and also what we see here in chapter 12, will need divine reassurance before traveling to Egypt. And God told him, go down and I will get you back out. All right, so we look at verses 11 through 13 then, and that is actually the second part of the letter G in your handout. 11 through 13 says, And it came to pass when he was close to entering Egypt that he said to Sarai, his wife, Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, This is his wife's, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. Yeah, there's some interesting statements here in this. First off, this was not a spur-of-the-moment mistake. But when you read what it said here, this was a premeditated sin. Okay? But technically, it was a half-truth. Look again at verse 12. It says, Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. It's a half-truth. Part of its motive probably was in which the Hurrians, these were the influential individuals at Haran, held the wife-sister relationship. A husband would even legally adopt his wife as a sister to increase his authority and the status of the marriage. This esteem is seen clearly in other events, where the brother has tremendous say over the sister's marriage. We'll not go and look at them, but you can go to chapter 24 of Genesis, and here you have the story about Laban and Rebekah. And then also in chapter 34 of Genesis, we'll read about Jacob's sons with Dinah. Dinah was a sister in that situation. This sin came about because of her beauty. Okay? As she lived to be 127 years old, she is middle-aged at 65. Therefore, Sarah's 60s would presumably correspond to our 30s or 40s today. And so Abram says she is a very attractive woman. Yes, John?
You said he'd been in Canaan for 10 years before this happened. She was 65 when they went to Canaan. She'd be 75 now.
Yeah, okay. Misprint on my part. Just checking to see if you were listening.
I was listening.
We'll blame the computer.
All right, but still, she lived to be 127. That's middle age for her. And so Abram says that because of your beauty and everything, the Egyptians are going to kill me and they're going to take you. So even if that is true, how many times does a wealthy and powerful man with no morals and every option chase after a middle-aged woman? Considering that...
Too many to count.
Yeah, too many to count. And the Pharaoh, the Egyptians, they would chase after this middle-aged woman. And that's what Abram is speculating. He's never been down to Egypt before, but apparently he knows something about the Egyptians, enough to have this kind of concern. Perhaps her beauty was that of a comparable sort, in that she might easily appear very beautiful in the eyes of the Egyptians, whose wives, according to both ancient and modern testimony, were generally ugly and faded early. So, if that's true, then that would be another reason why they might find Sarai very attractive. And so Abram was concerned about that. Apparently this fear was not baseless. Marriage was respected sufficiently that men felt they must dispose of the husband before they could take his wife. And this is why Abram felt this way. Egyptian parallels prove that men had no hesitation about committing murder in an effort to secure their object.
David did that, didn't he?
Yeah. And in this case, their object would be Sarai. And as Isaac just mentioned, you're just segueing right into this for me. Remember David's abduction of Bathsheba. They named her Bathsheba because she took lots of baths. I just had to throw that.
What's the book, chapter, and verse for that?
My favorite comedian in Branson. Okay.
Kathy said her middle name's on the housetop.
Yeah. And so, what did David do? To get Bathsheba?
Sent her husband to the front line to get
Sent her husband, Uriah, to the front line so that he would be killed, so he could legally marry Bathsheba. Note that Abram only mentions that she will not be killed, without raising the possibility that they will take her to be a wife. Therefore, it appears that he was only concerned about his fate in these verses that we looked at, 11 through 13. It is easy to speculate, though, about a passage like this, that all half-truths are the same as lies. However, we as Christians must be wary in doing so, as this passage also teaches that not all half-truths are lies. This statement was not a lie because it was only half-true, but because it was used to deceive, and that's why it was a lie. Imagine, if you will, all the times that Abram introduced Sarai to someone as his wife, without including that she was also his half-sister. It is the motive that makes the lie. And that's the lesson we have here in verses 11 through 13. It became a lie because of the motive. Any comments through 13? Yes,
Did he
sir.
not learn the fact that it was a lie?
No, because he
He
made
done
the
it
same
again.
mistake again.
Yeah. That was why I asked the question.
And we'll
He
get to
done
that.
it again.
We'll get that.
Well,
All right.
you put the reference up there.
Do what?
You put the reference up there.
Yeah. Okay. So, we look at Genesis 12, 14 through 16. And again, in your handout, okay, capital letter H, what was it that made Abram's actions in Egypt wrong? In verse 12, as John mentioned, she was his half-sister. But look at verses 12 through, verses 14 through 16. So it was when Abram came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male, donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. Alright, so, as foreseen, complication occurred here. Sarai's beauty was reported to the Pharaoh. And his advances could not be stayed off at this point. Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's house. And when a woman was brought into the harem of the eastern princes, she underwent for a considerable time certain purification before she was brought into the king's presence. I put Esther chapter 2 verses 8 and 9 up there. Florence, you have that?
So it was, when the king's command and decree was heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and they moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women.
So just as we read in Esther there, this is an example of what kind of goes on here, this certain purification period of time. And I stress that because of the fact that there are some commentaries that would suggest that the Pharaoh did in fact have a sexual relationship with Sarai. There is no indication of that at all. And in fact, based on this, that was not the case. I'll just state it like that. Because it was in this interim that God plagued Pharaoh and his house with plagues, so that Sarai was restored before she could have been taken to the bed of the Egyptian king. All right? Any questions or comments through verse 16? All right, look then at verse 20. And in verse 20, so Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. This is in, let's see, this would be page 31. No. Okay, this is the part that I put down that the writer of your handout did not include in this, okay? Abram left with a Pharaoh appointed escort. Perhaps this is to ensure that Abram and Sarai left Egypt. God had made it plain that his favor rested on Abram. Perhaps Pharaoh was afraid that he would be further punished if any evil befell Abram while he was in the land of Egypt. Considering that Abram had feared death at Egyptians' hands and that his dishonesty had involved the king in potential adultery, which was regarded throughout the ancient world as the great sin deserving of the death penalty, the royal leniency is remarkable. Pharaoh implicitly acknowledges that God is protecting Abram, and he therefore takes no revenge on him. Any comments or questions about verse 20? Any comments or questions about chapter 12? Yes, Ron.
I remember now.
Do you remember now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Before us, I didn't remember him actually appearing to Abram and Abraham. But chapter 15, God spoke to Abram through a vision.
Yes.
There.
Yes.
But chapter 17, he actually appeared to Abram and told him to make covenant with him. Chapter 18, you remember, Abraham looks up and he sees three men.
Yes.
And one of them he clearly identifies as the Lord.
Yes.
So the appearance of a man there.
In fact, you mentioned chapter 18, and I don't think I'll get into it, but I'll just mention that when I looked at some of the commentaries, they suggest that one of the three men was not God, but it was Jesus Christ.
I believe there's evidence for that.
Yeah.
The angel of the Lord.
Yeah. John?
Did Pharaoh worship God?
No.
Then why would Pharaoh care what God thought?
Well, because he feared for his life.
Had a lot of
After
bad
all the
luck.
plagues-
Feared?
Yeah, he had a
This is
lot of
before
bad
the
luck.
plagues. This is before the plague.
Yeah, but
There's some evidence that Pharaoh had some respect for God as a supreme being because of the things he did.
right. Yeah. And it's before the 10 plagues, you're right. But here in the verses we didn't read and everything, let's see here. Verse 17, what's it say, John?
The Lord plagued Pharaoh.
Jessica, me or him?
You.
Oh, it says, and the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his
Oh,
house
so he
with
did
great
plague him.
plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife.
So it wasn't before the plagues, he plagued him. You've seen
But
my
if he
point.
was an idol worshiper, he wouldn't believe that God done that, he'd believe the idols did.
Well,
That's the way idol worshippers do. They believe their idols do all this.
that's true. That's true. But the situation was here, he knew that Abram was a worshiper of God. He knew that Sarai was a worshiper of God. He saw the power of Abram's God through these plagues. Didn't mean that he believed in that God, but he feared that Abram's
He's smart
God
enough
would
to
do
command a
something.
country?
Huh?
He's smart enough to command a country?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't back there then.
Well, I'd say if his God was able to do all this, and you know yours wasn't, you're worshiping the wrong God.
Oh, he probably asked his God for, please take these plagues away. It never happened.
That's what I'm saying.
Now, we won't get into it, but you remember the situation, where is it, 2 Kings, where Jezebel and the idols that they worshipped and everything, they felt that their idols were just as powerful as God.
They thought it was when the statue of Diana fell down too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I
Every
point
time
that
they
out
stood
because
it
that
up.
could very well be the situation here, is that Pharaoh felt that his God was just as powerful as Abram's God, but he didn't want Abram's God to come down on him anymore. And so, he got him out of the country. That's the simplest explanation I can give to you.
With protection.
With protection, that's exactly right.
Make sure they eat.
So,
And
our
with-
time is about up, but yes,
He's making sure they leave.
somebody had a comment?
Take all my stuff.
That brings us to chapter 13. And in chapter 13 in your handout on page 31, Victor Eskew, he gives the title of Genesis 13, land rights or property problems and promises, the land promise reaffirmed. He gives a key verse of Genesis 13 verses 14 and 15. And so when you look at the outline, of course, we'll go down to the lessons from Genesis 13. Number A, or capital letter A rather, it is possible for a rich man to be a faithful servant of God. Abram traveled from Egypt to the southern part of Canaan at this point. Lot traveled with him because this chapter is a turning point in the story of Lot. We are reminded that Lot journeyed with Abram down into Egypt, and now he journeys back up into the south. Lot's placement in the list may indicate that relations among the family are already growing apart. By placing Lot last in the list after Abram's possessions, the text hints at a degree of estrangement. So let's look at chapter 13 with this little bit here. It says in verse 1, Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. You notice Lot was mentioned last there. Okay, so there may already be some problems there. Verse 2 and 3, Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, or Ai. So, it is possible, let me pull this up here, it is possible for a rich man to be a faithful servant of God. We see that in the accounts of the gospel. It is easier for a rich man to go through the
eye of an eagle.
Yeah, eye of an eagle.
It's harder.
Easier for a camel to go through an eye
Yeah,
of an
easier
eagle.
for a camel to go through the
It's
Eye of an
harder.
eagle.
eye of an eagle than a rich man to go to heaven. So we'll leave it with this, that it is possible for a rich man to be faithful servant of God.
To be introduced to Lot's wife.
Yes.